Hi everyone. So in this lecture, we'll be going over how you should deploy your web apps. So now you've made a web app either through workshops or maybe you started your project already. But currently your web app just lives locally and really only you, your team, or anyone who can clone your code has access to it. So if someone wants to go to your web app, they would have to like clone your code, build the app, and then go to like localhost. So your app really only works locally, and this is just not an efficient way to get users to use your web app. So we need a way for users who don't have a copy of our code to be able to go to our web app. And the way we do this is through deployment. So what is deployment? Deployment is when you make your web app accessible to the rest of the world. And really what we're doing is getting somebody else to run our server file. Um, so we don't want to run the server file ourselves because you can imagine our laptops are not a very reliable place to be constantly running a server. Our laptops have limited resources and like maybe your laptop will run out of battery or get disconnected from the internet. So we want someone else to run our server file, and this somebody else is usually a cloud platform that's specially designed to be highly reliable. So once you deploy, anytime someone wants to visit your site, they can just visit a URL which will show them your web app. So today we're going to be using Render to deploy, and you should be using Render to deploy your projects. And once you deploy on Render, your web app you should be able to go to your web app using your web app name.onrender.com. And your app name part is just going to be the name of your app. And if you want an example of a deployed web app on Render, you can go to this Capbook link on the slides, and this was deployed using Render. Okay, so I'll be giving a visual walkthrough of how you should deploy your web app. You can follow along if you want, if you already have some of your project code set up. And only one person per team needs to do this. So if you haven't already, coordinate with your team members on who's going to be deploying for your team. Okay, so I'm assuming that, yeah, I think it's on. Um, so I'm assuming that you've already done homework 3 where you set up your Render account. Does anyone need time to set up their account? Okay, awesome. So let's do a visual walkthrough on how to deploy your web app. Um, oh, someone raised their hand on Zoom. Um, okay, so the person who raised your hand on Zoom, do you want me to walk through it or can you just follow along on the instructions document? Okay, I don't have much time, so I'm going to move on for now. But if you're having trouble setting up your Render account, please like ask on Piazza or hop on the help queue. Okay, so once you log into your Render accounts, you should open up a tab that looks like this on the right-hand side, and make sure you click on your team for Render, because we're going to be deploying your app through your team and not your personal account. So once you click on your team, you can click on creating a new web service, and you can do this either through this panel in your dashboard here, or you can also click on this new button at the top right and click on web service. Just make sure you click on web service. Does anyone need more time for this? Okay, and once you click create new web service, you'll see a screen that looks like this. And you can select build and deploy from a Git repository. So select that and then press next. Okay, and once you do that, you should connect your GitHub if you haven't done this already. Can you raise your hand if you still need to connect your GitHub so I can give you a few minutes or a few seconds? Okay, so if you've already connected your GitHub, then you'll see a page that looks like this, and you can select a repository to connect. And you should select your project repository. Um, and if you're having trouble seeing it in the list, then put yourself on the queue or ask on Piazza. Is everyone on this page? Is anyone having issues? Okay. So once you select a repository to connect, you'll see a screen that looks like this, and basically we have to pick a bunch of options for our web service. So first, pick a name for your web service, and here I pick weblab.example, but you should pick whatever name is suitable for your web app that you're developing. Once you've typed in a unique name, select a region where your web service runs. Generally, the closer to your end users is better, so I picked US East, but it doesn't really matter for our purposes. So just select a region. And after that, oh, and also for the branch, I selected master. You might see main instead of master, but you should select main if you see main, and master if you see master. Okay, and the root directory portion of this is optional. Um, Basically, like in render, every time you push to your root repository, then render is going to automatically redeploy your application. However, if the root directory is, yeah. Wait, can you not hear me?
I think it's like way like this.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, can people hear me now? Okay, sorry. Is there anything that you want me to go over again? Okay, sorry about that. So for your root directory, basically every time you push a change into your root directory, render is going to redeploy your application automatically. However, if the root directory is automatically set by default to the root of your repository, so any change you push to your repository by default will trigger a redeploy. However, if you want to set your root directory to something else, meaning if you only want changes pushed to a certain portion of your directory to cause a redeploy, then you can put that directory under your root directory. But I think for the vast majority of you, you can just leave this blank, unless you really don't want changes to certain parts of your repository to trigger redeploys. Okay, and then next, just pick node for your runtime. Anyone have any questions or have any issues with this? Okay, cool. And so next we're going to select our build and start commands. So for your build command, put npm install and npm run build. And recall npm install will just install all the dependency in your package.json file into your node modules folder. And npm run build is going to create an optimized build for your app. So start command, we're going to put npm start. Basically, this is going to start your server. All right, any questions on this over here? Yeah. Oh, if you can't change it, then it's fine. It's not a big deal. It's like a very, very small difference. Okay, any other questions or concerns before we move on? All right, so next you need to select your instance type. And here, remember we have our 200 free dollars of credit that we gave you. And so you can select any tier under $200 really. But for the purposes of this class, you can probably select either the starter or standard one, unless you're using a lot of compute resources, which I feel like you probably won't be. But just select something under $200 here. Okay, any questions, concerns? All right, so after that, you're going to be asked for environmental variables. So the environmental variables that you should set here are your Mongo server connection URL and also your session secret. And if you don't know what these are yet, that's okay. Well, you should know your Mongo server URL already from the Mongo lecture. But I'll explain environmental variables in more details in just a little bit. So if you don't want to set this yet, that's totally okay. You can go back and set environmental variables later. And finally, there's like some advanced features that you can add. I don't think really any of you will need to mess with this, but one thing that you could change is like, for example, if you don't want render to automatically redeploy your app when you push changes, then you can turn that off in the advanced settings. And there's a bunch of other things that you can mess with, but it's very optional. Okay, And once you're done with that, just press Create Web Service. Does anyone need more time? Okay, I'll give you like a minute. Yes. Yes, you should be able to update a lot of these. I think you can definitely update your environmental variables. I'm not sure if you can change things like the name and region later. Um, but yeah, you can definitely change environmental variables. Any other questions? Okay, who needs more time? All right, so now you should have deployed, but you might have run into some issues. Before you deploy, you should always make sure that your web app can build locally, all right? Um, but even still, you might run into some issues in the actual deployment process. So if your deployment succeeded, you should see something like this in your dashboard. Um, for example, like for the Capbook app, you should see this green check mark saying it's deployed under the status. And if you go to events, I'm not sure why this popped up. Okay. And if you go to events in your dashboard, to get to this page, you just need to click on your service under your dashboard, and you'll be able to see the page for your web service. So if you go to events and you were able to successfully deploy, you should see a bunch of green signs like this, and you should see something that says deploy live. However, if you had some issues, you might see like a red X in the status for your service. And if you see that red X, then you can check the logs for your web service by going to this logs tab on the left. And looking at your logs is really helpful for debugging. So if you're having issues deploying, you should go to your logs, which will show the errors that occurred during the deployment process. Is anyone having any serious issues? Okay, does anyone need more time to get here? Yeah. Secret option required for oh, that's probably because you need a secret a session secret, and I'll be going over that for the environmental variables. So if you're having like some errors saying that you have like a secret required, we'll be talking about setting environmental variables now, and hopefully that will resolve the error. So to talk about environmental variables, we're going to talk about an important concept called process.env. So you learn about React Land, which is in the front end, and in the back end for the server, we've talked about MongoDB and Google authentication. Process.env also lives on the back end, and basically it will be injected into your node runtime and provide a lot of global environmental variables for your backend code to use. So again, process.env serves as a sort of global variable for all your backend files to be able to access. And we're going to use it to hide sensitive information. And the reason for this is that currently in your code, you might have important secrets just typed out in the open in your code base. For example, you might have typed your Mongo connection URL into your code base. This is not a good idea because this URL, remember, contains your username and your password. So if you ended up pushing this code into your remote repository, then anyone who that can see the repository can then see your secrets, your passwords, and stuff like that. And that would obviously be really bad. So we need some way to hide these from people, from other people that can see our code base. And that's what process.env is going to do for us. So again, this is bad. We don't want these secrets typed out in our code. So to hide these secrets, we're going to use a .env file. And the first step is to add a file named .env to your project's outermost folder. And everybody on your team needs to do this, so this is an individual step because .env files are local and won't be on your remote repository. So if you've already started your project, then I recommend opening it now and just following along and adding this .env file. If you haven't started your project, that's totally okay. You can also refer to these slides later. Okay, so once you've made your .env file, it can be blank for now. Add your .env file to your project's .gitignore file. Remember, .gitignore is going to include files that you want Git to ignore, meaning that they won't be tracked by like Git's version control. And it won't be on your remote repository, which is the key part. So nothing in your .env file will end up being in your remote repository or tracked by Git history. Okay, so this is what it'll look like. If you open your .gitignore, you just need to add another line that says .env after the node modules line. Does anyone need more time? Okay, so once you have your .env file made, you should start by adding two relevant secrets to your .env file. And these are going to be the session secret and your Mongo server, so your connection URL for Mongo. Your session secret, here in this example, I just set it to session.-secret, but you should really try to set it to like some random permutation of strings. Basically, this is going to be used to encrypt your session cookie to prevent hijacking. So it's very important to keep the secret. You can share it with your teammates, of course, but definitely not your users. Okay, and again, no, everyone has to make their own .env file. It's okay if your session secrets are different in your local copies of your code, but once we add these environmental variables to render, you're going to need to decide on a single session secret to put on render. Okay, any questions on this? Okay, does anyone need more time to find their Mongo server URL or type in the session secret? Okay, so once you've done this, you need to install the .env package. And to do this, run npm install .env. And you need to add the following line at the top of your server.js file, require.env.config. And this will just let us use process.env in your code base. And the final step is to use process.env. Your variable name wherever you need. So any variable in your .env file, you can simply access by writing process.env. Your variable name. So here's what our code looked like before we started using process.env. We had our Mongo connection URL out in the open like this, meaning that anyone with our remote repository could see our password. We also had our session secret out in the open like this, which is not great. So again, this is bad. So once we set our env file with our session secret and Mongo server URL, you can simply just write code like this instead of having your secrets out in the open. So for your Mongo connection URL, you can just type in process.env.mongo server. And basically, this is just going to access your .env file and take the Mongo server that you set there. And for your session secret, we just use process.env.session secret. This way, when you push your code onto your remote repository, anyone looking at your code will only see that you use some process.env variable, but they won't actually know what the value of that variable is because your .env file is private to yourself and it's local on your machine. Okay, any questions on process.env? Okay, so after you make these changes, make sure you git add, git commit, and git push. And then after that, you should be able to automatically just redeploy, but if you turn off automatic redeploying upon pushes, then you can manually redeploy on the render site. Okay, so You might have noticed that, again, .env is a local file. So you'll also need to set your environmental variables on render because render doesn't actually have access to our .env files. So to fix this, we need to set render's environmental variables, which is basically like render's version of our .env file. So let's look at how to set environmental variables on render. So for your deployed web app, you can go to the dashboard for your web service, then go to the environment tab on the left. And once you click on the environment tab, you should see a screen that looks like this on the right, where you can set your key and value pairs for your environmental variables. So type in the Mongo server and session secret that you put into your local .env file. Another thing you could do is just directly upload your .env file here. And this might be the safer option in case you accidentally typed in something wrong. Any questions, concerns? Okay, and once you do that, you can manually redeploy your render app again by using this manual deploy button. And that's it. Hopefully after that, your web app is deploying properly. But if you're still having issues deploying, then put yourself on the queue or ask us in Piazza or office hours. Okay, so just to recap, link your app to render through GitHub. You can create a .env file and add it to your .gitignore. And remember, your .env file should contain secrets that you don't want GitHub to know about. And again, you add like sensitive data such as your Mongo connection URL and your session secret to your .env file. And you can access them in your backend code using process.env the variable name. And to make sure render is aware of these environmental variables, because remember .env isn't on GitHub, you need to open environment on your web service dashboard and put them in. And you can also just upload your .env file. And after this, click deploy and it should work, but if it's not, that's totally okay. Sometimes things still go wrong, and just ask for help if you need it. And now we're going to have a guest lecture from the people actually behind Render.